What if I told you that in 1967, Muhammad Ali walked into a Houston courtroom expecting a fair hearing, but instead faced a judge who had already decided to send him to prison for 5 years, not for justice, but for being an uppity Negro who dared to challenge white America? Judge William Thornton had built his 30-year career sending black men to prison, and he saw Ali as the perfect target. But what Muhammad Ali said in those final moments before sentencing didn't just save him from prison. It shattered a lifetime of prejudice and forced a racist judge to confront his own soul. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button. June 20th, 1967. The federal courthouse in Houston was packed beyond capacity as Muhammad Ali faced Judge William Thornton for refusing induction into the U.S. Army. Outside, protesters chanted. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone expected to witness the fall of America's most famous athlete. Judge Thornton sat behind his imposing bench like a king surveying his kingdom. At 62, he was the pillar of Texas's legal establishment, a man known for being tough on crime, especially when that crime involved black defendants. In 30 years on the bench, he'd sentenced more black men to prison than any other judge in Texas history. Thornton came from old Confederate money. His grandfather had been a prominent Ku Klux Klan member, and Billy had grown up hearing stories about when everyone knew their place. Though too smart to use slurs publicly, everyone in Texas legal circles knew exactly where Judge Thornton stood on matters of race. The Ali case represented everything Thornton despised about the changing 1960s. Here was a young black man who'd gotten rich and famous, converted to Islam, changed his Christian name, and now had the audacity to refuse military service. To Thornton, Ali embodied the dangerous idea that black Americans could think for themselves and challenge white authority. As Ali entered that morning, flanked by his legal team, Thornton felt his jaw clench. The boxer looked calm, almost serene, wearing a dark suit and walking with quiet confidence. Ali nodded respectfully to the judge, seemingly unaware he was walking into what Thornton considered a foregone conclusion. The prosecution's case was straightforward. Ali had refused military induction, claiming religious exemption as a Nation of Islam minister. The government demanded the maximum penalty, 5 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. For 2 hours, Thornton listened with barely concealed impatience. His mind was already made up. This wasn't about religious freedom. It was about teaching an uppity black man that no one was above the law. When Ali's defense argued their client's religious beliefs were sincere, Thornton barely listened. He was composing his sentencing speech. "Your Honor," Ali's attorney said, "we ask that you consider the sincerity of Mr. Ali's religious conversion." Thornton leaned forward, voice dripping with sarcasm. Sincere religious beliefs. This man changed his religion like he changes his clothes. The courtroom stirred uncomfortably. Thornton's bias was showing. After closing arguments, Thornton called a recess. In his chambers, he reviewed notes he didn't need. His mind was made up. 5 years in federal prison. Make an example that would discourage other young black men from defying their government. When court reconvened, Thornton looked out with satisfaction. This moment would define his legacy. The day he stood up to forces trying to destroy American values. "Will the defendant please rise?" Thornton commanded. Muhammad Ali stood slowly, hands clasped behind his back, expression calm and dignified. He looked directly at Judge Thornton without fear or defiance, but with something else, a quiet strength that filled the entire courtroom. "Mr. Ali," Thornton began, "you stand convicted of refusing induction into the United States Armed Forces. This isn't merely a law violation. It's a betrayal of the country that gave you everything you have." The courtroom fell silent. "Before I pass sentence, the court will allow you to make a statement. I doubt you have anything to say that will change this court's mind." Ali's lawyers had coached him on what to say. Express remorse, appeal to the judge's fairness. But when Muhammad Ali opened his mouth, the words that came out were not the ones his lawyers had scripted. "Your Honor," Ali said, his voice clear and strong, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. Thornton nodded impatiently. Your Honor, you said America gave me everything I have. But I want to tell you what America gave me, and what it didn't give me. The judge's eyes narrowed. America gave me the opportunity to use my fists to make money. America gave me fame as long as I stayed in my place and kept my mouth shut about things that mattered. The courtroom was completely silent. But Your Honor, America didn't give me the right to eat lunch next to a white child until I was 22 years old. America didn't give me the right to sleep in the same hotel as white folks. America didn't give me the right to drink from the same water fountain. Judge Thornton's face reddened, but Ali continued. So when you say America gave me everything, I respectfully disagree. The success I achieved in spite of America, not because of it. Something in Ali's demeanor stopped the judge from interrupting. Your Honor, you say I'm hiding behind religion to avoid serving my country. But I want to ask you something. Ali paused, his eyes never leaving Thornton's face. If America asked you to fight a war to protect the rights of people who look like me, would you go? If America asked you to risk your life to defend the freedom of people who couldn't vote in your state, would you do it? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Because that's what America is asking me to do, Your Honor. Fight for the freedom of people in Vietnam while my own people don't have freedom right here in Texas. Judge Thornton shifted uncomfortably. My religion teaches me that all people are equal in God's eyes, but your courts, Your Honor, with all due respect, have spent 100 years telling people like me that we're not equal in the eyes of the law. Ali's voice grew stronger, more passionate, but never disrespectful. You want to send me to prison for following my conscience, but Your Honor, isn't that what America is supposed to be about? The right to follow your conscience, even when it's unpopular. Thornton found himself leaning forward, listening intently despite himself. I could have gone to Vietnam, Your Honor. I could have served in a safe position, posed for photographs. But that would have been a lie. Ali spread his hands, a gesture of openness and honesty. Instead, I chose to tell the truth. I chose to say I cannot, in good conscience, participate in a war I believe is wrong. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. But Your Honor, I want you to consider something. 30 years from now, when your grandchildren read about this moment, do you want them to read that their grandfather stood on the side of truth and justice? Or do you want them to read that he forced a man to betray his conscience? Thornton felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. Because I believe, Your Honor, that someday this country will realize that the men who refused to fight in Vietnam weren't cowards. They were the ones brave enough to stand up and say this war was wrong when everyone else was afraid to speak the truth. Ali paused, letting his words sink in. So if you want to send me to prison, I accept that. But I won't apologize for doing what I believe is right. Ali sat down, the courtroom still frozen in complete silence. Judge Thornton stared at the defendant for what felt like eternity. Everything he'd planned to say had evaporated from his mind. For the first time in 30 years on the bench, Billy Thornton found himself genuinely uncertain. The young man before him wasn't the arrogant troublemaker he'd expected. Ali had spoken with dignity, intelligence, and moral clarity that cut through all of Thornton's preconceptions. Thornton called for another recess, retreating to his chambers in confusion. For 30 years he'd seen the world in black and white, literally and figuratively. But Muhammad Ali didn't fit into any neat category. As he sat in his chambers, Thornton thought about his grandson who was about to turn 18. What would he think if he knew his grandfather had sent a man to prison for following his conscience? For the first time in decades, Judge William Thornton began questioning whether he was on the right side of history. When court reconvened an hour later, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Everyone expected Thornton to deliver the maximum sentence. Instead, Thornton sat quietly for several minutes, staring at his hands. "Mr. Ali," he finally said, his voice softer than it had been all day, "your words have given this court much to consider." The courtroom stirred with surprise. For 30 years, I have presided with the belief that my job was to uphold the law without question, regardless of motivations. Thornton looked up, meeting Ali's eyes directly. But your statement has forced me to consider whether blind adherence to law, without consideration of conscience, is truly justice. Reporters scribbled frantically. This court finds that while you are technically guilty, the sincerity of your religious beliefs and the moral courage you've demonstrated deserve recognition. Ali's lawyers exchanged glances, hardly daring to hope. Therefore, this court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison, but hereby suspends that sentence pending appeal. The courtroom erupted in chaos. But Judge Thornton wasn't finished. "Mr. Ali," he said, raising his voice above the commotion, "I want you to know that your words today have changed this court's perspective on what it means to serve justice. This old judge has learned something new today." As the courtroom emptied, Judge Thornton sat alone, contemplating what had happened. A young black man had walked into his courtroom as a defendant and left having taught the judge a lesson about courage and conscience. Word of Thornton's decision spread quickly through Texas legal circles. Colleagues criticized him, saying he'd gone soft, but Thornton no longer cared. Over the following months, as Ali's case worked through appeals, Thornton found himself reading about the Vietnam War and civil rights. Slowly, painfully, he began confronting his career. The hundreds of young black men he'd sentenced more harshly than whites. In 1971, when the Supreme Court overturned Ali's conviction, Judge Thornton publicly praised the decision. "Muhammad Ali was right, and I was wrong. He was right to follow his conscience. History will remember him as a man of courage and principle." Thornton served 5 more years. But his approach to justice changed dramatically. He became known for fairness, regardless of race, and insistence that courts consider not just law's letter, but its spirit. When he retired in 1972, Thornton wrote Muhammad Ali a personal letter. "Dear Mr. Ali, your words in my courtroom changed not just a legal decision, but a life. You taught this old judge that true patriotism sometimes means standing up to your country when it's wrong. Thank you for your courage." Ali kept that letter for the rest of his life. Judge William Thornton died in 1985. At his funeral, his grandson Billy Jr., now a civil rights lawyer, spoke about his grandfather's transformation from a symbol of racial injustice to a champion of human dignity. "My grandfather taught me it's never too late to change. He learned those lessons from Muhammad Ali in 1967 and spent the rest of his life trying to live up to them." The story of Muhammad Ali and Judge Thornton reminds us that even the most hardened hearts can be opened by truth spoken with courage and dignity. Ali didn't change the judge's mind by arguing law. He changed it by appealing to the man's fundamental sense of right and wrong. Sometimes the greatest victories happen, not in boxing rings, but in moments when moral courage meets moral cowardice and refuses to back down. Sometimes the most important fights are measured not in knockouts, but in consciences awakened. Muhammad Ali walked into that Houston courtroom as a defendant, but left having reminded everyone present, including a racist judge, what it truly means to be an American. Not someone who follows orders without question, but someone with courage to stand up for what's right. That's not just championship behavior. That's the kind of courage that changes the world, one heart at a time.